Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of March 9th, and this is your Monday briefing. Here's what we're keeping an eye on this week. The Senate is in session, and the House will return on March 16th. The partial government shutdown continues with no action to fund the Department of Homeland Security for the remainder of the fiscal year, at least not yet, after a short-term funding measure expired February 13th. A vote was anticipated today, but it is likely to face opposition from Democrats. On Tuesday, a Senate Finance Subcommittee will examine the 10-year fiscal outlook with Congressional Budget Office Director Philip Swagel. On trade, the U.S. Court of International Trade has directed U.S. Customs and Border Protection to remove IEEPA tariffs and automatically refund duties with interest following the Supreme Court's February 20th decision. Now, Customs and Border Protection has responded. They filed with the CIT a request for a 45-day delay to set up the systems to process those refunds. The administration says it plans to complete several trade investigations within 5 months that could provide a basis for new tariffs. Separately, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has announced that global tariffs imposed under Section 122 could increase from 10% to 15% sometime in March. A coalition of 24 states, meanwhile, has filed suit in the Court of International Trade challenging the Section 122 tariffs. The U.S. Trade Representative has also begun bilateral discussions with Mexico ahead of the USMCA review, and the IRS released Notice 2026-17, providing simplified interim guidance on Section 987 foreign currency computations. Now, speaking of the IRS and turning to developments there, I'm joined by Deb Palacheck to talk about that. Thank you so much for being with us.
Happy to be here.
Good to have you. So let's start with actually what happened last week. There was a Ways and Means Committee hearing at which the IRS CEO, Frank Bisignano, testified. So IRS was very much front and center. Can you give us an outline of what happened there and any potential issues that arose?
Sure, I'm happy to provide an overview of that hearing.
Sure.
So the hearing did have a more positive tone than many IRS hearings have had in the past. And Frank Bisignano is the new CEO as of October, so a pretty new role for the IRS. He expressed commitment to improving processes, modernizing technologies, utilization of AI with a human element, and respecting the employee workforce. He also noted a lot of successes with the current filing season and focused on 3 key priorities, which he reiterated a few times, those being service, privacy, and collection. There weren't really any significant new updates with respect to the IRS, but the hearing did cover a wide variety of topics, including the fair share of partisan debate. In terms of the technical tax topics, they talked quite a bit about the research credit. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. OB3 implementation, and then a number of members asked questions with respect to virtual currency in the areas of staking, as well as in the areas of the 1099 DA form. And Democrat members focused most of their attention on the cancellation of the National Treasury's employee union contract, as well as IRS service challenges. And finally, the topic that they probably asked the most questions about is with respect to privacy and the intergovernmental disclosure of information as it related to 6103. And with respect to that topic, the CEO indicated he wasn't able to engage given the current litigation that was going on. So those are some of the overview topics.
That's a lot going on there. You had mentioned the research development, research credits, and there seemed to be a conversation about disallowance of research credits, especially with respect to some manufacturing activity, which seems a little alarming, but I don't want to overstate it for our viewers. Can you give us some illumination into exactly what that means and what concerns might actually exist?
Sure. So a few members did raise some concerns at the hearing in terms of what's going on in audits, especially as you note in the context of manufacturers. The CEO, Bisignano, did note that he would look into this further. So there wasn't a lot of substantive dialogue in that context. We have seen from our perspective that companies that are undergoing research credit audits, they're very factually intensive and often taxpayers are required to do a lot of work up front, have a lot of engagement with the exam teams in order to educate them on their business processes, why their various expenditures do qualify for research credit. We advise them to implement fairly robust documentation processes, be ready to have those discussions about the law and about the qualification when they walk into audits. And also we advise companies that they should be prepared to push back or elevate up management chains if the information document requests don't accord with the publication Citation 5125,
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
examination procedures, or don't appear to accord with the law with respect to
Sure.
research credit.
Right.
I mean, one good thing we've been seeing is the fast track process. We
Mhm.
have been seeing some companies go to fast track on research credit
Oh,
issues
okay.
and being able to resolve their audits through the course of that alternative
Okay.
dispute resolution.
Nice to have some positive
Yep,
news.
absolutely.
So the IRS also announced something called broader operational priorities. Could you tell us a little bit what exactly that means and what's the implication for some of the IRS service levels?
Yep. So on the service front, and there's a lot of dialogue around this, and the CEO indicated a number of statistics that showed a lot of glimmers of hope in terms of the service operations. He indicated increased online users, increased online inquiries, faster direct deposit refunds, faster processing of amended returns, and also a decrease in phone line times for people
Okay.
calling to the IRS to obtain
Sounds good.
information. I mean, my assumption is that the figures that were noted in these spaces are probably more applicable to individual taxpayers. We do hear a lot from companies about existing pain points in the service context. For example, we are hearing from companies that there are very long amended return processes, difficulty having account issues addressed, and experiencing other pain points such as those. As we've talked about many times, the IRS did undergo significant cuts last year, around 25%.
Yep.
So hopefully the figures that were cited signal hope for large business taxpayers in this year ahead, where we have had many slower timelines this past year.
Sure.
And we're also seeing some signals of more normalcy come along. I mean, more press releases, more announcements, and also some technological advancements, which give hope that hopefully those are emblematic of more changes to come throughout the course of the fiscal year on the service side for the large business taxpayers.
Normalcy. It's a great word to
Yes,
hear
yes.
you say. I hope
Hopefully it's coming, yes.
Hope we get a little more of that. So could you bring us back to some of the things that are pain points? Unfortunately, enforcement, audit activity. What's going on in that space, and what would you recommend companies do about it, or that they should be thinking about?
Yep. So I mean, I was heartened when asked about streamlining audits in the course of the hearing. Bisaggiano did share some hopeful messages, indicating current focus on concluding audits sooner. And we have a lot of companies with issues with respect to currency, with respect to their audits, and working on exam process improvements. I mean, hopefully changes will come this year around timelines. As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of currency issues amongst taxpayers, large business taxpayers. We're hopeful for more effective risk discussions and certainly expanded utilization of those alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. I mentioned earlier the fast track process.
Yep.
There was guidance that came out last summer from large business about fast track, and also post-appeals mediation opportunities that came out in October. I mean, it's still too soon to tell, I think, with those programs, but we have, as I mentioned in the research credit space, we have seen more taxpayers use these mechanisms. We're seeing some successes, especially when both parties come to the table with that resolution mindset. They acknowledge the hazards of litigation and really want to resolve the issues. So I think again, hopeful messages that we've seen a lot of progress in a short amount of time, and hopefully more will come this year. I think it's also helpful that appeals seems to be very supportive of these programs. They lost around 28% of their workforce last year, and recognizing that the traditional appeals process is longer. It's a longer avenue for resolution, so they're very supportive of fast track as well. So hopefully, good news to come throughout the course of this year with more alternative dispute resolution mechanisms on the horizon. But again, a lot of pain points that we're seeing for taxpayers and large business companies at current. But hopefully the messages that were shared by the CEO at the hearing will give us hope for the future and what they're going to focus on throughout the course of 2026.
I love the positive mindset, and especially your advice to approach it with an optimistic, resolution-oriented mindset. I think that's great advice. So, Deb, thank you so much for your insights today. I really appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And for our viewers, before we close today, you'll see in the description of this episode the latest Week in Review with Andrew Pryor. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week and take care.